Welcome back, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our headlines. Israel has demanded that all hostages are released in any Gaza ceasefire deal after Hamas agreed to a deal that would see half of the dead and alive hostages returned. Qatar say that the deal Hamas agreed to was almost identical to the one that was proposed by US Envoy Steve Witkoff, which Israel had previously said yes to. Sources suggest that Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meet him in Moscow as President Trump pushes for a direct Putin-Zelensky meeting. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says any meeting between presidents must be prepared very thoroughly. This comes as US President Donald Trump says that he wants the war between Russia and Ukraine to end quickly without wasting time. Trump says that Ukraine should not have sought NATO membership and suggested that the country may lose significant territory. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the country is already working on concrete security guarantees in the case a ceasefire is agreed. This comes as Ukraine's foreign minister says Russian attacks show it is critical to end the war shortly. Foreign Minister from China Wang Yi has met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi as talks take place following meetings over historical border tensions. Wang Yi is set to visit Pakistan after he concludes his state visit in India. Air Canada and the Canadian Union of Public Employees, representing 10,000 flight attendants, have now concluded their four-day strike after reaching a tentative agreement. Air Canada has also warned that its full service may take 7 to 10 days to restore. This comes as Pierre Poilievre has won a special election in Alberta, returning to Parliament after losing his seat in April elections. Poilievre, who accuses the Liberal government of mishandling relations with Washington, will confront Carney when the House of Commons resumes next month. And authorities in Pakistan say that the death toll from devastating flooding after monsoon rains has now risen to around 400. Excavator machines have been working to clear mud and fallen trees as residents describe the event as being like doomsday. We start off this hour as sources suggest that the Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed Moscow as a venue for a possible summit with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. The suggestion comes after Putin's meeting with US President Donald Trump in Alaska, where both leaders pledged to pursue a settlement. It also follows more recent talks between Trump, Zelensky and European leaders in Washington. The US president says he is pushing for direct dialogue, while Russia insists any meeting must be carefully prepared. Kyiv remains cautious with questions over territorial concessions and security guarantees still unresolved. Well, joining us to discuss this news is John Morosomondo, who is the president of the Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst, joining us live from Washington, D.C. John, thank you, as always, for your time and for joining us this evening in New Delhi. How do you take this from sources suggesting that Vladimir Putin wants Zelensky to go to Moscow? Do you think that's a possibility that Zelensky would agree with?
Well, I think that Zelensky might have some apprehension about Moscow as a venue because it reinforces the idea of Russian dominance, and considering that Zelensky is very much opposed to the idea of Russia being Ukraine's overlord. However, I think that considering that President Trump and Putin jokingly discussed it during their summit in Alaska last week, that it's probably the likely venue.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, talks about a meeting between Zelensky and Putin, something that has been positively looked at by Ukraine. Of course, Zelensky suggested that meetings in Istanbul, Turkey, also included meetings of the two leaders. Do you think Zelensky might do what he has to here and go into enemy territory in order to get that face-to-face meeting and hopefully end this war sooner rather than later?
Well, I think that Zelensky doesn't have a lot of cards to play at this point. I mean, Vladimir Putin controls at least a third of Ukraine's territory, and he's going. And Zelensky, wants to come out saving face, so he'll probably push for some place like Turkey, which has been more favorable to Ukraine. However, I think that Zelensky is going to have to, make some give and leeway in the name of diplomacy.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to bring you another update, John, that we have, and that is that Turkish Foreign Minister and the US Secretary of State have discussed possible steps to end the Russia-Ukraine war in a phone call. This according to the Turkish Foreign Ministry. Apologies for some audio issues there. We'll wait for John Rossimondo to rejoin us, and hopefully we can get his opinion on that.
I'm here.
John, can you hear me? Well, let's move on as we get that sorted. And we look, as Russia says any peace deal on Ukraine must guarantee its security and protect Russian speakers in Ukraine. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed any Zelensky-Putin meeting must be carefully prepared. Hopes of progress grew after Zelensky and European leaders met US President Donald Trump in Washington. France and Britain hosted a virtual meeting of allies to coordinate next steps, with Geneva suggested as a venue. But doubts remain in Kyiv, where many fear Ukraine may be pushed to concede territory as Europe voices concerns over Moscow's ambitions. The war remains stalled despite recent Russian advances. Well, hopefully we are now once again joined by John Rossimondo. John, can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Fantastic. Let's briefly, before we touch on that point, I did bring some information about the US Secretary of State and Turkish Foreign Minister both holding a conversation about possible steps to end this conflict. Turkey, of course, have been key. As I mentioned earlier, they have held direct talks between between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. How significant is this phone call?
Well, Turkey has maintained strong relations with both Russia and Ukraine, and as part of the NATO alliance has been crucial in holding Russian troops back for their advances with the provision of drones to the Ukrainians and the closing off of the Bosphorus and Dardanelles from the Russian warships. So I think that the Turks have a crucial role to play in terms of shuttle diplomacy from between both sides.
Yes, absolutely. John, please do stay with us once again. We're going to move to another development in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and this comes as Muscovites have shared their opinions on possible face-to-face talks between the leaders of Russia and Ukraine. Here is what Moscow natives have had to say.
Мне кажется, в любом случае контакт это хорошо. И учитывая то, что Путин хороший переговорщик, я думаю, что здесь есть на что рассчитывать. Мне кажется, что результат может быть очень хороший, поскольку у нас очень хорошие позиции.
Well, we are now joined once again by John Rossimondo. Thank you for staying with us. Of course, Russia and Russian officials saying that any deal needs to also look out for their security guarantees. How do you see that rhetoric?
Well, I think that the one thing that the West has forgotten is Russia's fear of the outside, which has been its primary modus operandi for hundreds of years. It's why Joseph Stalin created the Warsaw Pact as a buffer between the West and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It's why the Russians made moves in the 19th century, and why they decided to move on Ukraine now. So the West has to be very understanding of the Russian mentality. It's not the Western mentality. So I think that any security guarantees for Ukraine need to come with a caveat that the Russians will not fear that NATO is going to invade Russia or something, which seems ridiculous to a lot of people, but it's just the way the Russians think.
John, thank you ever so much for providing your insights across all of those topics. Of course, so much information coming in. We will continue to bring all of it to you here on NewsX World. But we now move from a European conflict to one in the Middle East. And a senior Israeli official has said that the government has demanded the release of all remaining hostages in any future Gaza deal, a day after Hamas accepted a new truce proposal. According to reports, the senior official has said that the government's stance had not changed and demanded the release of all hostages. This comes after efforts to pause the fighting reportedly gained new momentum over the past week after Israel announced plans for a new offensive to seize control of Gaza City. Meanwhile, Qatari mediators awaited an Israeli response to a fresh Gaza ceasefire plan, which have warned of humanitarian catastrophes if Gaza truce offers are rejected. Let's now take a listen into what Qatar's Foreign Ministry of Affairs spokesperson has had to say.
لسنا فقط كما نقول دائما في لحظة محورية وفي لحظة حاسمة وما إلى ذلك، نحن الآن في لحظة إنسانية فارقة. إن لم نصل إلى اتفاق الآن فنحن أمام كارثة إنسانية ستجعل الكوارث التي سبقتها يعني تتقزم. We are yet to receive a response from the Israeli side, so we cannot make any claims that a breakthrough has been made. But we do believe it is a positive point when we have a positive response from Hamas over the agreement that was there on the...
Well, joining us to discuss these developments, Scott Faulkner, head of the Eagle Enterprises, a security firm in Washington, and he also joins us from Washington. Scott, thank you ever so much for joining us. It seems that Israel aren't going to agree to this ceasefire deal that Hamas had agreed to. They say they want all of the hostages released at once. This comes despite Israel agreeing to a previous deal, which Qatar says is almost identical, that Steve Witkoff had proposed. What do you make of this situation?
Well, once again, Hamas is trying to play for time. They're still hoping that between domestic support within Israel and international support or opposition to Israel will somehow blunt the Israeli offensive. So they're all playing for time. I mean, even Trump several months ago said, release all the hostages. Israel says, release all the hostages. This continually grotesque parceling out of bodies and live hostages has to stop. And again, Hamas has to release all alive and dead hostages as soon as possible if anyone is to take them seriously.
Yes, Scott, questions will be raised, though, as to why Israel said yes before and is saying no now. Why do you think there has been a shift?
I think they're probably finding things in these tunnels and as they're continuing to push into Gaza City, and that's showing that Hamas has been probably regrouping and is just sitting there going, we've got to end this. We've got to end this terrorist cell that is still in the middle of Israel.
Yes, and finally, Scott, unfortunately, we are running shorter on time. But where do you think this goes next? Of course, so much has been put on Hamas not saying yes to a deal, potentially delaying, as you mentioned as well. Now Hamas has said yes to a deal. Do you think that there could be further ramifications for the conflict, but also potentially for hostages that Hamas have been holding for almost 2 years now?
Well, again, it's only a matter of speculation if any of these hostages are still alive. And so Israel knows that two things need to happen. The hostages all need to be accounted for, and whether they are alive or dead, they need to be released. And secondly, the Hamas threat has to end permanently. Otherwise, it's just going to be a matter of time before we have another horrendous October attack. So Israel's got a dual goal, and they're trying to find every way possible militarily and diplomatically to achieve them.
Scott Faulkner, as always, such a pleasure to have you on the programme. Again, we expect reactions and fallouts if these sources are to be confirmed, and Israel has said no to that deal. We will bring that all to you. But we do have another update to bring you, and a meeting between NATO military leaders on Ukraine is expected to take place on Wednesday. That's according to reports. This comes after US President Donald Trump said that, of course, a meeting needs to take place, but also that Ukraine will not be part of NATO and should not have tried to be part of NATO. It also comes as Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico has stated that progress towards ending the war in Ukraine cannot be achieved without discussing potential territorial changes. He also noted that any resolution must consider that Ukraine cannot join NATO, a sentiment that, of course, Donald Trump himself has also said. Well, we come back to Europe, and the Europe heatwave has resulted in more than 1,100 deaths in Spain. A 16-day-long heatwave has, of course, been wreaking havoc and leading to wildfires. The Public Health Agency has said that officials reported 1,149 excess deaths in Spain from August the 3rd to 18th that could be attributed to the scorching temperatures. Although Spain's mortality monitoring system cannot confirm a direct cause between deaths and high temperatures, it provides the most reliable estimates of fatalities in which heat was likely a decisive factor. Climate experts say global warming is driving longer, more intense and more frequent heat waves around the world. Earlier, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez warned that difficult hours remain in the fight against wildfires ravaging the country, despite the dropping of temperatures. PM Sánchez also urged the affected people to be attentive to the recommendations of the institutions. Well, once again, we are joined by Desmond Majekadunmi, who is an environmentalist who is live from Lagos, joining us once again to discuss this situation. Of course, the situation on the ground is difficult. That confirmation of more than 1,100 deaths being attributed to this heatwave in Spain. But Desmond, we heard previous reports and a previous study found that an earlier heatwave at the end of July, or the beginning of July, led to 2,300 deaths as well. Why can heatwaves be so deadly, and how do people avoid getting into serious harm in extreme heats?
Yes, well, the reality is that people will get dehydrated very rapidly. And given the normal temperature that people are used to in Europe, possibly they don't really take the required amount of water. They don't have enough liquid. And dehydration can bring on very exacerbated metabolic circumstances that can lead to death. There's no doubt about that. Also, the human metabolism, it takes time. It takes, sometimes years. People in the tropical areas, their metabolism is able to, get used to this sort of thing. Even genetically, they're more genetically disposed for it. So that's one of the major causes of the death. Then, of course, there's the other things like, we have far more frequent fires. And these are causing terrible tragedies as well. However, it's very encouraging in a way, as much as, our hearts really obviously go out to the people that are lost, that the head of government in Spain, he warned the people that there are more heat waves to come. But he was just referring to this year, whereas the reality is that over the next few years, in fact, over the next couple of decades, there's going to be far more heat waves, and they're going to be far more severe, even if we do take the necessary measures to reduce the major cause of the heat waves, which is global warming that is anthropogenically induced because of the pollution. So we need to really, really get ready for some terrible, terrible consequences of the actions that we are taking that are damaging nature. Remember, nature is obliged to respond to whatever she is given. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, Desmond. We are unfortunately out of time, but of course, so many areas in Europe hit with heat waves, wildfires, but also flooding across the world as well. It really is potentially a time where world leaders, not just the Spanish Prime Minister, could be looking at what to do to resolve these issues. But Desmond, until next time, thank you ever so much for joining us. And that is all that we have time for. We'll be back very soon with more of the latest from across the world.